This is the second part to a two-part series about two-wheel drive buggies, specifically about alternative brands that aren't as popular as, say, Associated or Schumacher. If you haven't watched that one, be sure to check it out. If you have, though, let's continue. Just like an 8th scale, there are a lot of different brands that make 10th scale cars, particularly two-wheel drive buggies for off-road racing. Unlike 8th scale though, people seem to have settled on about 3 or 4 different chassis brands and that's about it. This is a shame as there are plenty of different chassis out there that can do extremely well when given enough time and effort. For this video, we'll be talking about the alternative brands that you don't see as often in the two-wheel drive buggy world, particularly in the US. I am aware that some of these brands are much more popular in other parts of the world. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the sponsors of this channel: A-Main Hobbies, RC Trophy Chasers, Leadfinger Racing, Cow RC, and Peach State Hobbies. Anything you guys purchase using the links or codes in the description below will directly support me as well. The first car I wish to go over technically isn't even out yet as of the time of me recording this. However, since it's so similar to the previous revision, I figured I'd put it in anyway. The Yokomo Super Off-Road 3.0 is the latest version of the two-wheel drive platform Yokomo has spent years perfecting. Yokomo once upon a time was a very popular and very successful car manufacturer in the 10th scale, dating all the way back to the RC10 days. They had a pretty positive relationship with Team Associated for a long time, as those who ran Team Associated two-wheel drives at the appropriate time would run the Yokomo four-wheel drive of that time. At a certain point though, both companies would split ways, with each one making a car for the missing spot of their fleet. Team Associated would make the B44 four-wheel drive buggy, and Yokomo would make their own two-wheel drive buggy that would eventually evolve into the YZ2 and then eventually the Super Off-Road. The YZ2 will go from revision after revision until eventually reach the current version of the two-wheel drive platform, the Super Off-Road 3.0. Moving on to the car itself, the Super Off-Road isn't exactly a groundbreaking design in the modern age. It follows a pretty tried and true two-wheel drive recipe that we've seen since the B6 era of cars to its natural conclusion. Mid-motor laydown transmission, 13mm shock bodies, aluminum chassis, all the usual stuff you'd expect from a two-wheel drive buggy in the modern RC world. The good thing about this simple, non-groundbreaking design is that it's pretty tried and true. It's a design that works and will continue to work for the foreseeable future, especially considering the problems that OEM 5-gear transmissions are having aside from wheel speed right now. The bad thing about this design is the exact same. It's not a very unique design in many ways at all. So if you're in the market for something different and off the wall, well, the Super Off-Road 3.0 simply isn't that. It's also important to note that the Super Off-Road 3.0 doesn't come as a dirt version as of the writing of this video. So if you want something with a ball diff, you're going to have to either update the 2.0 or buy a ball diff and some springs for the 3.0. Either way, you're going to have to shell out some cash. Now, it's been a while since I actually drove the Super Off-Road platform, when it was still called the YZ2. However, since the car hasn't changed much since then other than the 13mm shock bodies, I'm willing to bet the car itself is still very versatile and very easy to set up for different surfaces. If you really want a good and well-sorted car for multiple modern 10th scale surfaces, then the Super Off-Road 3.0 will work well for you, if you're willing to shell out the cash. The next car I wish to go over is a bit of an oddball, that being the PR Racing B10R. Now, the PR Racing, like I mentioned briefly in my underrated brands video, is an Asian brand known for their inexpensive cars and parts. However, the way they get the cheaper parts and kits is via how they package their parts. This way, they can get you a good car with good quality parts for less money than other brands. Luckily, this extends to the B10R buggy, as it actually comes with some parts that would be option parts on other cars. The front spindles and rear hubs on the B10R are machined aluminum, where on other cars they are plastic. The same thing applies to the steering components, I believe. Like the Yokomo and most other cars I'm going to mention in this and the previous video, the B10R follows a tried and true formula of a standard two-wheel drive buggy in the modern era. So once again, like the Yokomo, there's not much groundbreaking with the design. What puts this car out there for many looking for a budget option for a two-wheel drive buggy kit is the cost of the B10R itself. with a price tag falling under $360. That's about $50 to about $100 less than other buggies in the market today from other more popular brands like Associated or Mugen Seiki. Couple this with the fact that each of the parts you'd normally upgrade like spindles and hubs are already upgraded out of the box, and you're left with a very good value. There are a few issues with the B10R though. Because PR Racing isn't really a legacy brand like Associated or Schumacher, or a brand with some serious names behind them like Mugen Seiki with Adam Drake, there's not a whole lot of resources in making the PR Racing platform of cars work on all surfaces. This platform's problems amplified considering that the B10R is a completely new platform for PR. Now don't get me wrong, the B10R can work on multiple setup surfaces if set up correctly. However, the amount of people who have made a setup sheet for the B10R isn't exactly high. It also doesn't help that the B10R doesn't come with a dirt/low grip version, so if you want to make the car work for lower grip conditions, you'll have to shell out the same amount of cash you saved buying the B10R in the first place for a ball diff and another set of springs. Even still, a lot of the things you learn on any two-wheel buggy will apply to the B10R, so if you're looking for a very friendly budget car, and you don't mind learning things your own way, the PR Racing B10R is a good buy. Moving on to another brand that used to be much more prevalent in the off-road world, but still is in the on-road world, we have Serpent. Much like I mentioned in PR Racing before, Serpent cars tend to be less expensive than other well-known brands. The difference here is that Serpent actually has some real racing pedigree with pretty much their entire on-road team, and the fact that the buggy I'm about to talk about was designed in part by Billy Easton, a former Team Associated driver and a very successful one at that, winning the 2003 IFMAR Championships in the two-wheel drive class at the Minreg RC Car Club in Florida. He ended up designing the car we know now as the SRX2, and through its generations it pioneered some things we take for granted on modern-day RC two-wheel drive buggies. Easy access diffs, holes in the ball cups to captured ball ends, and a few other standard features we all see all the time now were first seen on the SRX2 in one of its iterations. This leads us to the current iteration of the SRX2, the Gen 3 Team Kit. This version of the SRX2 is pretty much a genetic endpoint to the Gen 3's design, as it comes with all the normal hop-ups and upgrades one would realistically need with the Gen 3. Aluminum shock caps, captured ball ends, sway bars, and a few other things updated from the original Gen 3 kit. It even comes with wheels and a gear diff for carpet and Astro running. There are two main issues with the SRX Team Kit though. The first one I mentioned with the B10R in the last section, that being that the car only comes with carpet and AstroTurf parts, so if you want to make a car a dirt car, you're going to have to shell out some cash for a ball diff and a different set of 12mm shock body springs. The reason I say 12mm shock body springs only is because the SRX2 Gen 3 Team Kit only comes with 12mm shock bodies. This kinda handicaps the possible performance of the SRX2 and its suspension feel, on the majority of tracks you're likely to see in most parts of the world, especially on tracks with flat type landings where pack is needed. Of course, it's possible to make the 12mm bore shocks work for most track types. The B6 didn't have 13mm shock bodies until the 6.4, but the 13mm shocks are easier to make work for those conditions. Now, you can run those Avid shocks I mentioned in the TLR section of the first part of this video series, but it's more than likely better to start with a buggy that already has the 13mm shocks. This isn't to say that the SRX Gen 3 is a bad buggy, because one aspect hasn't been updated. In fact, I consider this buggy to be a better out-of-the-box deal than the TLR on pure value. Its biggest problem, though, loops back to the setup part of the B10R, and that there's not too much recent setup advice one could go to on, say, Pettit RC. All in all, for the Serpent SRX2, it's easy to recommend for the fact that it was the first to do a lot of things for two-wheel drive buggies, but it's hard to recommend for the other reasons I mentioned prior. If you're dead set on buying one, and you're close to a Serpent team in some way, you'll end up with a good buggy that can perform well and cost less. Now, there are two other buggies that I've yet to mention, one for the reason that the manufacturer doesn't seem to really care about 10 scale at the moment, and one because it's simply not out yet. The S-Works S12 is a buggy. That's all I can really say about it from the outside looking in, as very few people I know run it in 10 scale exclusively. I know it's a good buggy, I just don't know much about it beyond that. Next up is the Agama N110. This two-wheel drive buggy features the same design that the N1 and N1E 8th scale buggies have, and it's really up in the air as to whether or not it works at a high level. We'll just have to see. And just like that, we've gone over all two-wheel buggies from both mainstream and not so mainstream brands. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. You can also subscribe to my Patreon if you want to support me financially. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank my active patrons Micah Williams, RC World Discord server, Casey Nix, Dave Armstrong, Rodney Bedingfield, Caden Merks, Ian Petrie, Buddy Howell, Jeffrey Coons, James T. Anderson, Shane T. Ruth, Gable Barber, Maxim RC Hobbies, and especially Morrison Watt. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh yeah, the HB Racing D2 Evo. Just no.